Every year, incredibly strong law school applicants are getting rejected, even when they have the stats, even when they have the background. And it's not because they're unqualified. It's because they are making application mistakes. And the thing is, no one even tells them what they are. Hey, I'm Mara Freilich. I'm a top-rated law school admissions consultant in the country, and I want to share with you the biggest law school application mistakes I see every year and how you can avoid them. The biggest law school application mistake, number one, is writing your personal statement like a cover letter. This is where someone essentially writes their resume, but in paragraph form. They're trying to prove why they have the skills, the qualifications to be a good lawyer. The problem is this one doesn't show anything new that an admissions officer can't get from your resume. And also what it doesn't do is the most important thing you want your personal statement to be doing in your law school application, which is showing that you have the traits of a successful lawyer, that you can think critically, write persuasively, draw connections between things that may not seem related, showing that analytical ability. When you just write about the skills you've gotten from certain jobs, the experiences you've gone through that have given you qualifications to be a good lawyer, you're not getting that analytical reflection. Admissions officers already know what you've done. They have it in your application form you fill out. They have it in your resume. They want to see how you think. There's a saying in law school that you don't actually learn anything in law school. You just learn how to think. By the way, that's totally true. I don't remember anything from law school, but I have an entirely new way of thinking. And so when you can show how you think, when you can show your intellect in your personal statement, that is how you stand out. My client Elijah almost made this mistake. He came to me, he had written a really well-written personal statement about pretty impressive experiences he had. He had worked at the White House. He had some serious legal internships where he got substantive experience. But all of that was really listing the experiences he had. He would say things like, I worked at the White House and learned how to handle big responsibility. He did it a little more articulate, but it was essentially that kind of sentiment. So instead, we took a step back and we reframed his personal statement around the observations and the insights that he had taken away from those experiences and how that led him to law. So now the personal statement wasn't just a polished version of his resume or really kind of selling his experiences. Instead, it was selling the way he thought and reflected analytically about those experiences and really showed that he had insight into law, into what he wanted to do with his legal career and how his experiences connected to them. That is very different than just a straightforward, I am qualified because I can write well, I can analyze things and telling them versus showing them. And Elijah ended up getting into Berkeley Law with a LSAT score almost 8 points below the median. Another one of the biggest law school application mistakes I see every year is relying on trauma and drama instead of insight. This is so common, and I think a lot of competitive applicants rely on this and then wonder why they got rejected. So I work with a lot of reapplicants who are coming to me with great stats, great background, who just didn't get the results they wanted or expected. And this is a big mistake I see with competitive applicants. They think the only way to stand out is to have a really impressive story or a really dramatic or traumatic story that kind of carries their entire application. So they might write their personal statement on one of the most formative experiences they've had in their life, but it may not be the most formative experience that they've had on their path to law school. A law school application is very different than a college application. Yes, to some extent, they are assessing who you are as a person, but for the most part, they are assessing who you are going to be as a lawyer. If a traumatic or dramatic or even impressive story is not directly related to why you want to go to law school and what you want to do as a lawyer, then it probably doesn't fit in. The other thing that a lot of applicants don't understand is that you are not the first applicant to have a really impressive or traumatic or dramatic story. Most of these admissions officers have been working in the field for many, many years. Every year they see so many applications. I promise you, they have seen it all. So your story itself is never really going to be the thing that makes you stand out, even if it's impressive, even if it is related to your why law. The thing that will make you stand out is the insights and the perspectives you have from whatever experiences you've had and how you connect them to your why law. No one else can have that combination of experience and insights because only you can think the way you do. So that is what makes you unique, and that is what is going to make you stand out. This is a mistake you want to be careful of now more than ever. In these really competitive admissions environments, law schools are focusing a lot on employability. So if you focus your application too much on the personal because it's an impressive story, a dramatic story, a traumatic story, whatever it is, you are ignoring the thing that law schools are looking for the most. Are you an employable future lawyer? Do you know why you want to go to law school? Are you someone that law firms or whatever your future path entails that future employers are going to want to hire? A personal story that doesn't connect to that is not going to answer that question for law schools. And that, more than it has ever been in other cycles, is critical for law schools. My client Leah came to me after having an application cycle that she was not very happy with. She didn't get into any school. She got waitlisted at a lot of schools she had expected to get into. So she wanted to reapply with my help. She made this mistake of assuming that her personal hardships was really going to carry the day for her. And look, she went through some really hard things that were impressive that she got through, that showed a lot of her character traits. But how she wrote about it in her initial application relied on that drama, relied on the hardship of it, instead of pulling out the insights she got from it and connected it to why she wanted to go to law school. So we shifted the angle of her application, and we still actually use the same experiences because for her, they did relate to why she wanted to go to law school, but we did so very directly. So it was not, the focus wasn't on the hardship itself like it was in the initial application. It was more of how those hardships gave her insights that other people may not have, that gave her perspective on how the law can be used on communities who need it, on things like access and things like what justice really means for different communities. That is a much more analytical essay than just purely telling the story of her hardship. And it answered for law schools exactly why she wanted to go to law school and what she wanted to do with her legal career. And she ended up getting into multiple T14 law schools with significant scholarship, despite the first cycle getting flat out rejected everywhere. So that can be the difference between having an application that really emphasizes the insights you have from your experiences versus focusing purely on the experiences because you think it's going to be kind of the shock factor. Another really common law school application mistake is never directly answering why law. After helping hundreds of law school applicants get into super competitive law schools, the top law schools, I have seen over and over what gets you in. And a big thing, especially now in these really competitive admission cycles, is making sure that you very directly answer why law. So one of the biggest law school application mistakes I see all the time is having a generic, vague, or entirely missing answer to why you want to go to law school. Or your answer doesn't reflect the reality of legal practice. So let me give you a few examples. So the missing entirely is pretty easy to explain, right? You don't mention at all really why you're going to law school. You might just say things like, oh, you've always wanted to be a lawyer. That doesn't really explain why you want to. Or you might just be talking like we just said about the other application mistake. You might just talk about a personal story without connecting it to why law. That's the easy one. The harder ones are where you almost assume that an admissions officer is going to put two and two together, where you kind of talk about certain experiences that might be tangentially related to law, or certain things that, have pushed you to be interested in law in the abstract, but you never get very direct with why you are going to law school and why you need to go to law school to do what you want to do. Now, some people think when I say this, that means they have to say exactly what they want to do with their legal career. Like they have to say, I'm going to go be a corporate litigator and I'm going to work in M&A for big tech. That's very specific. And honestly, in these really competitive admission cycles, that's pretty powerful. When employability is mattering a lot, having a specific career path is a big leverage. But you can only say that if you can actually point to experiences that you have that show that you understand why that's the career path you want. Just throwing it out there randomly without any proof you can say behind it is really not that compelling. So in those cases, what you can do is you can almost lay out a menu for admissions officers, because what they want to see is that you have really thought this out. Law school is an easy career path to start, not to finish, but it's an easy career path to start, right? You don't need any prerequisites. Anyone can just go take the LSAT and apply. So they are they are always looking to make sure that people are coming to law school because they want to be a lawyer, because they know why they want to be a lawyer. And it's not just the abstract, I love the skill set of a lawyer. I like reading and writing. Great, everyone does. But why being a lawyer? Why did you have to do law instead of something else that uses those skills? So if you're not exactly sure what you want to do with your career path, lay out a few options. Maybe you let's say you're saying this corporate litigator or corporate law. You want to work in corporate law. You're not sure if you want to do litigation, or maybe you'll do transactional work. That's a very broad one again. But either way, you want to reflect that you understand what the legal field actually entails. Because what law schools are asking themselves when they're reviewing your application is, does this applicant make sense in the legal field? Are they going to be employable? Are they going to come to law school and have to figure out what they want to do and take a whole year before they understand where they're going? They don't want applicants who are going to have to struggle with that. How hiring works right now, it is very early. So they want applicants who come into law school with a clear direction of why they're going to law. One of my clients, Matt, came to me also as a reapplicant. He had awesome stats. He had an awesome background, but he had gotten rejected everywhere when he applied on his own. And he was really confused. So we took a look at his application materials, and it was immediately quite clear to me why. He was an amazing writer. He even showed how smart he was through his material. So he did that showing. He didn't just write a cover letter application. But at the end of reading his personal statement, I was like, okay, you're clearly very smart. You clearly can think critically and have the skills of a lawyer, but I have no idea why you're going to law school or what you want to do with your career path. At the very end, he said something like, maybe one day I'll be a professor or a judge. First, those are very, very far out career paths. Not in terms of far out of like strange, but more of those are not usually what you do right after law school. So law schools are going to want to see, okay, how are you going to get there if that is your ultimate career goal? And those are not always the most pragmatic career paths to present. A lot of chance goes into both those career paths. A lot of ego often is perceived as people who want to go into those career paths. So even if that is what you want to do ultimately, you're going to want to have a bridge or reflect in your application. What is the career bridge you're going to have before you get there? Matt had none of that. So it was very hard for law schools to picture him as a lawyer. So we reworked his entire application. We started entirely from scratch, even though it's a really, really well-written essays that he had. And we positioned him as an applicant who had a lot of experience working in free speech, especially with more controversial topics, and understanding how critical law and lawyers are to preserving that. Now he's an applicant who has a clear understanding of why he's going to law school, and it's based and steeped in his actual experiences. He ended up going to UChicago Law with significant scholarship. He applied that early decision, but before he even got all his other choices, he was already getting some T10 offers. So it entirely shifted the results he got by just shifting the positioning and answering that question very directly for law schools, why he's going to law. Another big law school application mistake is having lack of cohesion across your application materials. A lot of applicants approach the application with each individual piece. They focus on their personal statement, then they move on to their statement of perspective, the supplemental essays, etc. And they kind of go one by one. And each of them might be strong individually, but often what I see is that when you zoom out and look at it holistically, there's a lack of cohesion there. There's not a single through line. They didn't start and zoom out before they even started their materials and choose their strategy and positioning. Every cycle, my clients get into top law schools, even when they don't even have the stats or some impressive background. The first thing we do to set up that successful application is define their core narrative. That is what controls their positioning, what controls the strategy for every piece of their application. Because we don't want any piece of the application to exist in a silo. Admissions officers are reading this holistically. They're not sitting down and grading each of your essays separately, right? They're looking at you as a whole. They're looking to see how you will fit into the class, how you will fit into their school, how you will be as an alum of their school. They want to know how all of this works together to build who you are. So you want every piece of your application to revolve around this overarching narrative, to revolve around this overarching strategy about who you are, what you're going to bring to the law school, and why you want to go to law. So you want cohesion among your materials, meaning your personal statement is complemented by how you describe things in your resume. It's complemented by your supplemental essays, by your statement of perspective. And you want cohesion in your actual narrative, in who you are and what you're putting forth. For instance, I had a client, Alex, and practically he wanted to go into corporate law, corporate litigation specifically. But all of his background was in engineering. And that was a big sell for him. So it was really important that whatever narrative we decided was the best, which frankly for him was patent litigation, that was seen throughout his materials. So oftentimes I'll see people write their personal statement, from the frame of what Alex did of like, I want to, work as a patent lawyer. And then their supplementals are kind of signaling that they might be interested in other things, or even something as small as the interest you fill out on your application. If you're saying, for instance, you want to do patent litigation, don't go in and put entertainment law, though maybe that kind of copyright is part of your patent. Or don't go in and put you want to use land use. Things like that are clearly, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but that are clearly contradictory. You want to be cohesive in your narrative in every little piece of your application. So even for instance, how we framed Alex's resume made it so we really focused and zoomed in on his experiences that would be very relevant to employers hiring for patent law, because that is what we're saying he wanted to do. So you want to have a very critical lens through all of your application materials, that they have both a cohesive narrative and cohesion among each other, in that they are presenting a singular narrative. Another one of the biggest law school application mistakes I see all the time is leaving opportunity on the table. And this happens in two ways primarily. One, either not applying because you think you don't have the stats and that you're just not qualified enough. But the thing is, every cycle, majority of my clients are actually getting into schools where they don't necessarily have the perfect stats, where they're either below one of the medians or sometimes even both. So don't leave a school out there just because you don't think you're qualified. You never know. The other big way that people leave opportunity on the table is avoiding writing optional supplemental essays. These are not optional in my book. All of my clients will write as many as are strategic for them. That doesn't mean write every single essay. If you aren't going to have something that's going to add value to your application, it's not always strategic to write. So more is not always better. However, for the most part, for the majority of the applicants I work with, these supplemental essays are a really critical part of painting the whole picture of who they are and what they're going to bring to law school. The personal statement's pretty short. You have 2 pages to condense a lot in. That's your professional why. The statement of perspective is not strategic for everyone to write. And if you write that, that is usually more about who you are as a person, what insights you're going to bring unique to you and your personal experiences. Supplemental essays are another great way to complement your application with stories that might show really awesome qualities and character traits that law schools are looking for, but that don't naturally fit into those other 2 core essays. And it's another opportunity to just show law schools how you think and who you're going to show up with in the law school community. So don't skimp out on those. I know it's a lot of essays to write, but these are important. Supplemental essays are also another awesome opportunity to address weaknesses in your application. So don't skimp out on these. Target your supplemental essays strategically and don't leave opportunity on the table. A big mistake I see with law school applicants every year is thinking that the rest of the application outside of your personal statement is just admin work. And it really is not. So things like a letter of recs, any addenda, filling out the application, you want to spend as much, or you want to give as much attention to detail on those pieces of your application as you do on the core essays. The resume, I always tell my clients, is where most admissions officers start. It's what I say is like the seed for the narrative that you are using as your positioning. So even how you frame all of your resume experiences, how you even organize your experiences, that is a strategy choice. Your addendum, if you decide to write one, that is huge in terms of explaining any weaknesses. How you frame that is, again, critical to whether it's going to come across as persuasive or something that law school admissions are going to just roll their eyes at or ignore. Even things like your letters of rec, don't just ask and assume they're going to write a phenomenal one. Do the due diligence and give them an outline. Remind them of the things you've accomplished. Remind them of the traits and the skills you want highlighted in your letter of rec. And then a big one is read your essays many, many times. Proofread them before you submit. Review your application where you fill everything out multiple times before you submit. Lawyering really requires attention to detail. Little tiny sloppy mistakes can be the difference between a rejection and an acceptance, especially in this very competitive admissions environment we're in right now, when law schools, frankly, are looking for any reason to get rid of someone so they have easier choices. One of the biggest law school application mistakes I am seeing right now is an over-reliance on AI. The problem with relying on AI is you're going to have a polished essay, but it's going to be generic. There is just common rhythm and language that AI uses that is just hard to get rid of when you use AI. And so your essay may sound great, but it's going to sound like everyone else's. And AI is not able to pull out the details. Even when you provide it, it doesn't put into essays the illustrations, the details that really make an essay unique to you and is what's going to help you stand out. Even my applicants this year, when we work from the very beginning to come up with their positioning and outline after they've gone through rounds of brainstorming, I can tell when they have thrown the outline I've worked on with them into AI and just spit back to me whatever essay it came up with. Again, they're not just asking, ChatGPT to come up with the personal statement on their own. They're giving very specific guidance, and it is still falling flat. I can always tell, like I said, because of the rhythm, but the thing that matters the most is the sterilization. It sounds good, but I don't feel connected to the applicant because there's just that resonance, that emotional resonance that is missing. And that is really important to standing out. because you want an admissions officer reading your essay to feel connected to you across the page, to feel an emotional connection, that they really know you. When it's just kind of glossed over by AI writing, that connection is missing. And when someone feels connected to you, they're much more likely to go on a limb for you and advocate for you to be admitted. When it's not there, you kind of just blur. You blend in with the rest of the crowd and are easily forgotten. Now, I don't think AI can't be useful at all in your application. It can, but use it very specifically. Use it maybe to help you organize your ideas. Don't use it for your actual writing. Now more than ever, I am reminding my clients that your idiosyncratic voice in terms of your writing style is actually really important. It's going to make your application more interesting and, again, more substantive and easier to connect with. The final biggest law school application mistake I see every year is not treating the application as a strategic whole. This is the underlying issue for pretty much all the mistakes we've just talked about, where you don't go into the application knowing your positioning, knowing your strategy from the outset. You go in and you kind of write each application material, but you're not really sure what the overarching point you're trying to make. How could you fix this? You want to think like an admissions officer. They are evaluating things like who you are personally, how you think. What are you going to bring to the law school community, and who are you going to be as a future lawyer? So when putting together your overarching strategy, you want to make sure that all of that is answered from the strongest positioning for you. That means understanding who are you within the context of this application process. What are you bringing to the table? What are the weaknesses you might need to compensate for within your application? What are the strengths you need to make sure you highlight? Understanding all of that and zooming out first is critical to putting together an application that not only stands out, but also has law schools wanting you over anyone else, even when you may not have the stats or the most impressive background. That is always the first thing I do with my clients. They do a very robust brainstorm, often multiple rounds of brainstorming. And that lets me see what I like to call the universe of this applicant. So try that for yourself too. Brainstorm about some different topics that can come up, that can answer those questions I just mentioned, and then take a holistic view. How are you going to fit all of this into a cohesive narrative? Your law school application is not a writing exercise. It's actually a positioning one.